Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we are talking about understanding your impact and articulating it, which is a topic that has come up a number of times, and we felt like this is something that people really struggle with in a number of different ways. It's really common that people struggle with this. They know they work hard, but they can't actually put their finger on what is better because of the work that they do. And that is totally normal. Most of us are terrible at talking about our impact. I think British modesty gets in the way. We can list all the things we do, all the meetings we go to, the projects we're part of, but what's better because of the work that we do, that's a tricky one sometimes to be able to quantify and articulate. And so often people have way more impact than they think. And Pam is the absolute master when she is helping people with interview prep at considering what impact have they had in the role, how do they tell that story, how do they articulate it for their CV and their job search. But this is just as important if you are in a role and you are thinking about your performance reviews, thinking about how you can ensure that you're positioned to be able to get progress internally. So yeah, let's head into it. Pam, I imagine this is a conversation on the daily for you with your clients.
Yeah, it is. And it's such an interesting one because I do feel like it's a real skill set in itself to be able to talk about and articulate the impact that you have within your work, but also when it comes to showing that impact in order to get selected for interviews, to get job offers and all of that kind of stuff. And as you say, it links back to the performance reviews. And what I find generally is that people focus on tasks rather than outcomes. And we see this so often in CVs where people just copy and paste the whole job description. And it's there you go, because I can do all of them things that you've asked for. And they think from an applicant tracking perspective that their CV will then get through that sift because they've got all the keywords in there. But actually what most people forget is that human that is reading that, they want to see the impact, they want to feel the impact, they want to know what value that you're bringing. So just to give a little example of this before we get into it. So just thinking about two candidates describing the same project management role, and one might talk about managing timelines and the other one might talk about how they delivered a project 3 weeks early, which saved 50k in contractor costs. Now that's an impact, and if I'm reading that as an employer, I'm like, oh my goodness, like we absolutely need somebody to come and save us large amounts of money on our projects and the things that we're delivering. And it's okay, so that candidate gets shortlisted, and the one that's managing timelines, well, we don't really know too much about the impact they've had, so that's how they're probably going to end up on the no pile. And I suppose it really is as simple as that, but you've got to go through each element and break it down and think about the impact that you're having. What did that thing do? And it's the same for performance reviews as well.
I see this in a slightly different context because I deliver on a senior level apprenticeship. So working with senior leaders who are in their role. And as part of the apprenticeship assessment, they need to demonstrate the difference that has occurred because of the development of knowledge, skills and behaviours in that apprenticeship framework. So they will be asked, what have you applied from what what have you learned, but what have you applied from what you've learned? And then what impact has it had? So if you've taken something and done something different in your role, learning to understand or look out for that impact is a big part of how that conversation. And I think that with internal interviews is also really important. So let's talk through then, because we've got a framework, haven't we, for this about the different types of impact that can happen. And I think sometimes when people start to break it down this way, it starts to get a little bit easier to then figure out what impact am I having and how can I explain that and articulate it, whether that's for an apprenticeship assessment or for a job search in your example. So let's top line then cover the different types of impact that people can have.
Okay, so the first type of impact is going to be the time impact. So the time or pace impact. And this is how you've made things go faster, how you've made things more efficient or better organized. So thinking about process improvements that save time, automation or streamlining initiatives, meeting deadlines ahead of schedule, that's usually a big one, or reducing bottlenecks and waiting times. Like they're probably the key elements of the time impact.
So if somebody's listening to this, then what questions can they ask themselves to uncover the types of impact that they've had around that kind of time or pace aspect of the framework?
The best questions are probably going to be starting with things like what processes have you improved or streamlined? That's usually a great one. When have you delivered something faster than expected? I'm sure we've all got loads of examples of that. And then also, how have you helped your team or organization work more efficiently?
And listeners can look back, can't they, and ask themselves that question right now, in the last 12 months, what processes have I improved or streamlined? What have I delivered that's helped either my team or the organization to work more efficiently? And I would imagine every single listener will be able to come up with examples that answer those questions.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you are thinking about taking that next step, and you're thinking about promotion, most of the impact that you've had in the last 2 to 3 years is going to be really key for the examples that you share within those interview situations or within your job applications. And then also linking that back to performance reviews. These are the things that are going to elevate you in those situations. So if you can go back and define those, the things that you've just done as part of the day to day, because it could be that if continuous improvement is a real key priority for the business that you're in, then you might be improving processes, on a weekly basis. But it's okay, let's backtrack and look at what did we actually do and what was the impact. And when you start doing that and jotting it down, you go, oh my goodness, have I really done all of this stuff? And then that's where then I then encourage people to go back to the CV and go, is this on your CV? So all of this good stuff that you're talking through, is it on your CV? And I find that a lot in CV consultations, because I'll say to people, I'm not going to look at your CV before the consultation. I want you to talk me through and tell me what you do in your job. And then we'll look at it and compare the two. And I go, there's a massive difference here, because all of that stuff is like an absolutely amazing, all of that stuff contains an absolutely amazing amount of impact, and you've not documented it or detailed it on the CV. And people have that light bulb moment where they go, oh my goodness, because I was just in the day to day. I just had my head stuck in the day to day. So this is a great opportunity as well to pause, to really think about the impact that you're having.
And being specific about the questions you ask yourself make it easier to uncover those aspects of impact. When you just ask yourself that general broad question of what impact have I had in the last 12 months, you might come up with one or two key things, maybe objectives that you've achieved or things that you were asked to do. But when you start to drill into those questions, you spot far more examples. And what I really want to highlight as well is when you're a leader or manager, it's not just what processes have I specifically improved or streamlined. It's not just what have I personally done. It's also you will have set objectives for your team. What objectives have you set or have your team done where you have enabled process improvement or streamlining or efficiency through members of your team? Because that still sits as part of your remit. You don't have to have been the one to design the new process. if you've identified that a process needed to be improved and you've overseen that process change and you've been the one to agree, yep, that's the way we're going to do it, let's go, then that still is a relevant example. So I think people need to start to broaden the view of where within my department or function have these things happened and ask themselves the more specific questions. And that's where they'll start to uncover some really great examples that the question of, okay, so what impact have you had might not get to.
Yeah, and it's such a good exercise to do. And I would say to anybody that's listening to this, regardless of where you're up to within your career, carve out some time to do this because it will massively help. And also, as well, you can uncover things where you're thinking, before I move on or before I think I'm moving on, I need to gain more experience in this area. And then actually, when you think back to everything that you've delivered, you're like, oh my goodness, like I'm there, I'm ready to move. It's just that you've just not recognized it because you've been so stuck in the day to day.
So let's move on to the next area then. So, time or pace is one area where people will often, nearly always, have examples of impact. What's the next area within the framework?
So the next area is going to be the quality impact. And this is how you've raised standards, reduced errors, or improved outcomes. So that can look like error reduction initiatives. Maybe it's customer satisfaction improvements. It could even be like enhanced accuracy or compliance within your department, or where you've maybe upgraded systems or processes.
So, again, people are going to have lots of areas, aren't they, around this where they're going to be able to get to because nearly everybody will have elements of this within a leadership role. So, what are some of the specific questions they can ask themselves to help to uncover these examples?
So the first one I'd say is, what standards have you raised in your role? Because I think that's really key. Another one could be, when have you prevented problems or mistakes? And then maybe, how have you improved customer or stakeholder experience?
And what I love about those questions is I think quality is great if you're in a role where, say, you're a head of customer service and you've got customer service metrics, time to answer if you're in a call center, or resolution if you're in a service desk function, something like that. And you can see those metrics. So those would be the examples that would naturally already be there. But actually asking yourself, what standards have I raised? That's a slightly different question that will probably open the door to things that are not as hard measure.
Yeah. And also, as well, you can ask yourself those questions and you can start looking at, what have I done? What standards did I raise? You can also look at it from the other perspective, because if you're thinking about these questions and you're like, I haven't really got an answer for that because I haven't done that, I haven't moved that particular thing forward, then that is an ideal thing to add into your personal development plan, where you're like, how can I improve the standards? And I suppose all of these questions that we're covering today on the podcast, if you're thinking, yeah, can't answer that, I haven't got that yet, or need to think a bit more around it, need to do a bit more work on it, you can make a real effort to look at how you can start incorporating these things, how you can start making these changes, because then when it comes to moving on or moving up, you're going to have so many more examples and things that you can talk about.
Absolutely. So, what's that next area then?
So the next area is going to be the cost impact. And this is how you saved money, how you've generated revenue, or how you've reduced the resources required. And if you're thinking about this, it's about budget savings through efficiency, it's about revenue generation activities, it could even be cost avoidance through risk management, and probably most importantly, resource optimization.
Again, really common areas that people will have involvement in, but maybe wouldn't normally quantify. So, what are some of the prompting questions that people can ask themselves on this one?
So, some of the key questions are going to be, where have you saved money or resources? That's going to be the number one. What revenue have you generated or protected? Like, I think we forget about the revenue that we've also protected? And then also, how have you made budgets stretch further?
That's such an interesting one because I think people often, you're absolutely right, don't think about how have I protected revenue or how have I made budgets stretch further. So they might talk about that I've delivered on time and to budget, but they don't always think about, okay, what have I done this year with my budget versus what I achieved last year with the same budget, or what have I achieved this year with a lower budget? So I love those points to prompt on how have you made it eked it out? How have you, particularly, I think if you're in an organization where things are tough, cost impact might seem tricky. And I think those questions really help to get to the heart of it. And so, how about for people that are not in commercial roles? If they are going to look for their cost impact, are the ways that they can identify examples?
So that's a really good question actually, because people automatically will say, I don't impact the cost element, but you will do things like use training budgets more efficiently. There might be something around resource allocation. There might be something about reducing recruitment costs through retention. There'll be a whole range of things that you can lean into that can show where you are saving or protecting money for the business.
And just as you say that, I think one of the ones that occurs to me is I did a project once where I was brought in on an internal recruitment element, and the salary that they paid me versus the saving on external agency fees, I was able to quantify that. So rather than just me talking about the recruitment that I'd done or the time to recruit, to be able to quantify previous year spend on agency and then the following year spend on agency versus my salary. And I think it was somewhere in the region of 7 times my annual salary, but I'd only actually been there for 5 months, I think, doing that project. So in reality, when you ask yourself some of these questions, you'll often find, even if you're not a budget holder or not in a commercial role, some really great elements of how your contribution has enabled other people to save on their budget.
Yeah, I love that. That is a perfect example, isn't it? Because sometimes people worry as well about being in a role for a short amount of time and start thinking, how can you have that much impact in a short space of time? But actually, you probably have more impact in those early days than you actually realize.
I think that's really true. I've done various different projects, and in short term, you can often really get stuck in and go after things in the early days that can make a really significant impact. So don't feel like you've got to have been in your job for 2 or 3 years to be able to quantify the impact that you've had. It could be as short as 2 or 3 months, and you will have examples of this. So, what's that final area then in terms of the impact that people have?
So the final area is going to be the people impact. And this is how you've developed others. Maybe you've improved team dynamics or where you've enhanced stakeholder relationships. And that looks like team development and mentoring. It could be improved collaboration or communication. It's definitely going to be stakeholder relationship building and stakeholder management, and also the change management and buy-in side of things as well.
Yeah, and I love that you've included this in the framework because the reality is that very often people don't know how to quantify the people impact, so they don't necessarily consider. And things like where your internal team members have progressed or where you've identified and created succession plans. There's loads of examples that you'll be involved in that have had a real impact when it comes to people. So, what questions can people ask on this one to help them think about it?
Okay, so some of the key questions here are going to be, who have you developed or supported, and just thinking through what you've actually achieved with those particular people. What relationships have you built or improved? And also thinking about the impact that's had to the business by you developing and improving those relationships. And then also, how have you helped teams work better together?
Love those. So, if people are listening to this then and identifying that, yes, probably I'm not articulating my impact as well as I could. I'm not articulating the full range of ways that I have impact in the role that I'm in. What's next? What do you suggest they do?
So I think what they need to do is start with a bit of self-reflection because you're probably doing more than you think you're doing because you're probably just stuck with your head down in the day to day. So just pause for a moment and think, what is better because of me in this role? That's really important. And then start thinking about past feedback that you've had, any project successes that you've had so far, any metrics or data that are going to back up the impact that you've had, and also any emails or messages that reference what other people value. If you've not got your smile file on the go, then you might want to think about what that looks like and where you've had great feedback, where you've had people praising the work that you've done. You might also want to add that in, or just those emails or messages that are thanking you or telling you where you've done a good job. Go back and look at all of those because when we're stuck in the day to day, it can be hard to see what's really going on. And also, as well, I think it's a very British thing, isn't it? Like, we don't like to accept compliments. So sometimes that can be really hard to read when someone sends you an email that is praising you or telling you've done a great job. That can be quite hard to read. So sometimes you might just have a quick scan and then close it down. But it's good to go back and look at those emails and those messages and just get under the skin of actually what you have done, what you have brought to the table, and what other people are seeing in you as well.
I love that. And we've created a download that will help people to take that time and to start to capture and document that impact. And one of the things that we reference in that, and I'm going to come to you on this because you do this brilliantly in LinkedIn posts, is using the so what test. So we've talked about it in the impact audit. What does that mean, and how can people use the so what test to really heighten the way that they're articulating their impact?
Yeah, so the so what test is amazing. And this kind of started from me questioning clients on so what? You've got this documented on your CV. Like, what does it mean? What did you actually do? Because, for example, if you've got, I led a digital transformation project, then what does that actually mean? Because how do I know what your involvement is? How does a reader or an employer know what your involvement is? So you can switch that up and you could say something like, I led the digital transformation project, reducing operational costs by 15% and improving customer response times from 48 hours to 4 hours. And it's wow, what an impact. Everybody wants somebody in their business that's going to reduce operational costs in that way. Or just as another example, one around restructuring the team, maybe. So lots of people have, I supported the restructure of the team, or I restructured the team in some way. But what about if you said, I restructured the team and I eliminated 2 layers of approval, which accelerated the decision-making process and improved employee engagement scores by 25%. And it's wow, again, next level, like how much impact can you actually hear and read in that new sentence? And I think that is what makes all the difference. And you, like, as we've talked about this throughout the episode, it's not just in your CV, it's not just at interviews, it's about your performance reviews. Like, it links back in really nicely with personal branding and everything. It's how you talk about the things that you've done, how you articulate that impact that is going to help you move either through that organization internally, or it's how it's going to help you move and get promoted. And it really does make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, Pam regularly shares on her LinkedIn posts examples of how she's supported clients to really make that change. So go connect with her and then look back at some of her LinkedIn posts, and you'll see some great examples of more specifics around these types of areas. So you will find the option to download the impact audit in the show notes. So do go do that and take your time to complete that impact audit. And if that is something that you need support with, then obviously, as ever, do get in touch. But I think the key thing that we would want you to take from this is that your impact is probably way bigger than you realize, and certainly way bigger than you are articulating to others. So take the time, use that framework to create that language and start to articulate it. And that way you will put yourself in that situation where you are in line for the opportunities that you want, whether that is internal progression, whether that is a move, and you'll really see the difference in terms of how you can get those messages across. So as ever, thank you so much for listening. Do let us know what you capture from your impact audit. Do share those examples with us. We always love to hear from listeners who are putting those things into practice. And we will be back next week with another episode. Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.